Welcome to the REI Diamonds Show with Dan Breslin, your source for real estate investment jewels of wisdom.
Welcome to episode number 87 of the REI Diamond Show with Jason Balin on funding flips in the 2017 hot real estate market. Dan Breslin here, REI Diamond Show host. Today, Jason and I discuss how to find and fund flips in today's hot real estate market. We talk about funding for established and experienced investors, as well as how to get started as a flipper when you have access to no cash or maybe even bad credit, like was my situation when I got started. Jason is the co-founder of Hard Money Bankers, a lender in the Philadelphia and Baltimore, D.C. markets where I also operate, and Jason is also a real estate investor. So let's jump right in, shall we? All right, welcome to the show, Mr. Jason Balin.
Thanks, Dan. Glad to be here.
For the listeners that don't know who you are, Hard Money Bankers may not be following you with all of your videos and educational things that you've done along the years. Can you tell people how you got started in real estate, what you kind of did up to this point, maybe what your business is comprised of today?
Yeah, absolutely. So a few years after I graduated college, which was early 2000s, working as like a mortgage broker. Yeah, I guess you can call that being in the finance industry. I don't know if it's I don't know if that's a proper term or not.
Nice.
But owned a few rentals, bought a few flips, things like that. But when I was working as a mortgage broker, I'll never forget the day that I had a loan and I brought it to the owner of the company, my boss at the time, and I was like, this deal there's a lot of collateral in this deal. It's strong, but the guy's credit's not letting them, get qualified for programs, blah blah blah. And he was like, oh, let me take a look at that. He's like, you know what? Why don't we just be the lender on that deal and we'll fund that deal? It wasn't bankable at the time, but he put up his own money and he ended up just being the bank. He just ended up being the lender. And, I was like, great, got a commission on it, no big deal. A few days later, I went back to him and I wanted to learn a little bit more. And he was like, yeah, we can just, you don't have to be a bank to be the bank. He had some money, he had some private capital lined up, and, he was doing private lending, AKA hard money lending, I guess you can call it, back then. So ever since that day, I was really intrigued with the lending side of real estate investing business. And about 11 years ago, my business partner, Chris Haddon, and I started our company, Hard Money Bankers. We went out. We had a little bit of our own money, but we primarily had to go out, raise a bunch of money, and, yada, yada, yada. 11 years later, we have about $40 million deployed on the streets between the D.C., Baltimore markets and the Philadelphia markets.
Cool. So Hard Money Bankers is doing 11 years. If I'm doing the math quickly, we're in 2017. You're starting in 2006. That had to be one hell of a time to start lending money. Am I right, Jason?
Yeah, that'd be one hell of a time. You're absolutely right. And you don't know what you don't know when you start, right? So it was, the housing market just crashed. I was still in my 20s at the time, and I had to go out and try to raise capital. And what I realized, and it's kind of a good lesson learned, is you have a good deal, it is easy to find capital, even in the bad times. And, obviously it took us a long time to create the fund that we have in play now of, a very large fund to go out and deploy cash with. But at the time it was hard to find money, but we always realized after talking to every single one of our investors, hey, we're starting this hard money company, we have access to these good deals, we're making sure they're all well underwritten. We follow the principles of the 4 C's and things like that. And they're like, yeah, that sounds great, Jason. Bring me a deal and I'll let you know, type of thing. And kind of trial and error, we realized over time that as long as we could find good deals, and, to this day, we all look for good deals, right? As long as we can find good deals, the money will follow.
You mentioned the 4 C's. For anyone listening, want to go through those? Just give a brief explanation of what's meant as the 4 C's, Jason?
Sure. So the 4 C's that we really try to live by when we look at a real estate deal. Now, keep in mind that we're not a bank. We don't have strict underwriting. We're a real hard money lender, a real private lender. It's a common sense type of deal. But what we do try to follow is the first C being collateral, the hard asset, the property itself. That's obviously the most important. If the numbers don't work and the value is not the property, there's no point. Collateral is the most important. Character is the second C. Second most important. We meet all of our borrowers. I encourage any real estate investor to meet their lenders. It's a relationship type of business. And, there's certainly borrowers out there that they'll do whatever on our end, they'll do whatever it takes, even if, they run into some trouble, to make sure they pay off their debt and they do right by it. So character is so important. After that, capacity. Do you have the ability to make monthly payments? Do you have the ability to properly execute on the project and finish construction and flip the house? So capacity is huge. And number 4 is credit. Credit obviously isn't everything, but it does tell a story about a lot of folks. If you're not paying any of your bills, what makes me think you're going to pay us? So those are the 4 C's, and those actually go in order of importance when we look at a loan.
Give us a brief example. I know like a lot of the hard money out here, back in 2004, 5, and 6, I remember my first loan that I paid 15% interest and 5 points on the first property that I flipped and the second, but I got 100% of the project costs, and, I did have some money in the bank, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 20,000 in the bank at the time. I don't think my credit was ever checked during the course of that, and it was a very relationship-driven loan. But can you give us an example of what's commonplace now? Are we having to put some down money into the project? Are we, having to have 650 credit scores? I mean, what is the ideal borrower look like, at least for hard money bankers, Jason?
Yeah, so weird time right now with money. There's a lot of large pools of capital out there that they want to get a good return on their money. They want to deploy capital. We've really stuck to old school underwriting of what we're comfortable with. We've done 1,500 loans, and I'm very confident that we know what we're doing. So we stick to what's worked over the last 11 years. We lend out at around 13% and 3 points, and some areas that's high, some areas that's low. That's the reason we lend money out on that end, is because we want to dictate how much money we make on these projects. And when we charge that amount, we make the money we want to make on it. I lost a lot of good borrowers over the years who are able to get cheaper capital these days, and that's fine. But just like anyone shouldn't do a deal just to do a deal, I'm not doing a loan just to do a loan. I want to make sure properly compensated and make the right amount of money on that. But, an average borrower right now is actually pretty darn qualified. They typically have pretty decent credit. They are buying a property at the right numbers. The market's changing. It's hard to find really good opportunities, but they're still out there. Our borrowers typically bring 10, 20% into the deal. And, for the most part, either they have experience or they come from a different industry. I mean, they may be new, but they come from an industry that they were somewhat successful in. So all in all, they're kind of stand-up individuals, and they have, maybe they don't, even if they don't have experience, they have the ability to be successful in this real estate space.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I know for me, I came from pretty much should have went bankrupt when the market went down. I went down with the market and stubbornly did not file for bankruptcy, and instead took a few years to kind of like pay off and dig myself out of the hole. And I'm sure I have listeners who, are either on one of two sides of the coin. Either they do have the good credit and they've got 10, 20% or more cash set aside for doing deals, and they're, just getting into it, or maybe experienced. And then we also have people who are probably like check to check, or, maybe in situations like I was in, who are just getting started. And I think, would you agree with me if I kind of say, like, look, if you probably first in this business have to get a feel for what a really good real estate deal is. And if you can get good at doing those real estate deals, you might have to give away a few of them in the form of like joint ventures with people with better credit and some assets to come to the deal, more experience, or maybe give away a few of those deals. And when I say give away, like to wholesale them to somebody else and make $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 assignment fees on a really good deal is definitely possible. But then you can get yourself into a position where maybe you're paying off some of the old credit and debts and things like I had to do, and rebuild my character, credit, and capacity, and get to a place where I have cash in the bank to borrow money from companies like hard money bankers at this point. I mean, would you agree that's pretty smart? First things first, you got to start to figure out a good deal. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, a good deal goes a long way. There's a lot of options that you can do, and real estate's easy, but it's dangerous at the same time if you don't know what you're doing, and you get yourself in trouble by that. So always encourage new real estate investors to either be in a position that you're hiring somebody to help you, the right person. Obviously, there's a lot of wrong people that you shouldn't be hiring, but there's a lot of right people you should be hiring, or partnering with somebody. And partnerships, obviously, they're not always as rosy as they potentially look, but, one thing that most people have and most people are, it's important is instinct. And you got to use your instinct. You got to use your gut feel. And if you feel comfortable with somebody that they're going to help you and you bring a solid deal to the table, sure, go that route instead of, getting a loan that you're personally guaranteeing. If you truly have a strong deal, you have a lot of options. You have a lot of flexibility, but hopefully you've kind of been around enough people, going to meetup groups, going to RIA groups, going to coaching programs and seminars and things like that. Like, I'm a huge advocate of education as long as it's the right education, and, create yourself a sphere of people that, you can trust, that can help you with some of these things. And, between, that sphere of influence, I'm sure, there's people that can help you navigate the waters and, turn that deal into some sort of money. It may not be as much as you want, like if you were getting lent the money yourself, but again, there's a lot of opportunities out there. So each one stands on their own.
Absolutely. I remember maybe when I started my career, I did like 3 assignments. And then I remember, I think it was the 4th deal that came through the pipeline, and I had met somebody. I'm not going to mention his name. He prefers to remain anonymous. But I met this gentleman at the Ring meeting, the Real Estate Investor Networking Group, which, 10, 11 years later in 2017, actually Hard Money Bankers is one of our partners in the Philadelphia Ring meeting. And we put on a fantastic event just like it was 10 years ago when I started, where the room was full of people who were doing deals, who had a cooperative attitude, wanted to help other people out. And I had met this gentleman at that meeting, and I assigned him the 3rd deal I had done. I assigned that deal to him. We assigned a 4th one together, so he was kind of like my partner on the deal in a sense. And I remember it was so funny, Jason. I walk into the meeting, and he sees me, and we had already done the one deal together, and I had brought a couple more. So I was like this kid, and I remember I had to get a ride to that meeting. Like, I didn't even have a car to show up at the meeting. I get a ride to the meeting, and he sees me there, but I was already building a reputation as like this young kid, this 26-year-old kid that could dig up deals somehow. And he approaches me and says, "You got anything cooking?" And I'm like, "No, this guy's trying to sell me this burned down house in Chester." And he turns his head and looks at me, and he's like, I think I got a buyer for that. And a week, 2 weeks later, and like a $17,000 assignment, whacked 50-50, the deal that I thought was worthless turned into like $8,500 a piece as a result of, partnering. And then the 5th deal I did with him, this is somebody I met at these networking events. Just like you said, there's so much value there. The 5th deal, I bring that to him. We were buying it for $120,000 or so. And my plan was, hey, we're going to close on this with your money, and we're going to just basically mop and glow the floors, and we're going to turn around and sell it as a handyman special to someone who wants to live here, because condition was good enough you can do this in this market that we're in right now in 2017, where you can sell properties as long as they can qualify for a mortgage to someone who's going to live there, and they're going to pay much more money than, say, a buyer like one of our Hard Money Banker clients, or one of, me and Diamond Equity flip numbers, right? So I remember how difficult it was, Jason. It was like I was going to steer it in a new direction, and he says to me, the partner, I bring him the deal, I take him to the deal, I tell him what we're going to do, and he says, "Well, why don't we just assign the deal?" And I remember I told him, well, I don't need you to assign the deal. I can assign the deal myself, but we're going to make more money if we do it this way, where we actually close on it. And he ended up having enough faith where we then became partners on that deal, and we whacked up $40,000 profit at the end of the day. And it was the 5th and 6th deals right behind those 2 other deals that actually that same gentleman was my funding partner on that deal, the deals I mentioned earlier in the episodes here. So showing up for those networking events, doing the work, being a person of character, being on time for the coffee meeting that you're going to meet with some of those other investors. If the newer people or less experienced, or if you're going into a new market and plugging in and starting all over with your contacts, show up, do the work, get out there and network and navigate your way through all the players. It's definitely all about the relationships.
Yeah, it goes a long way, and it doesn't matter what market we're in, no matter what the conditions are, there's always opportunities. There's always opportunities. If we're in a market like we are in now, it may be more competitive. There's a lot of people in the space, but keep in mind, there's a lot of people in the space. The majority of them don't know what the heck they're doing anyways. So, you being the professional / experienced, that goes a long way. over a lot of newer people or someone who's just trying to come into the space and maybe make a quick buck. So, there's no, or I shouldn't say no, but it's hard. If you're trying to play the get rich quick game, it's a hard thing going. This is a long-term business. You do it full-time, you can do it part-time, it doesn't matter. But it's a long-term play, and at the end of the day, there's a lot of opportunities and there's a lot of money to be made.
So I want to take a turn right now, Jason. I know you've been analyzing. You had to have done over 1,000 deals by now, right? Where you've looked at comps and you've decided to invest, not invest. So I'm going to step out on a limb that I know is pretty secure and say that you're probably an expert at certain neighborhoods and certain opportunities, and those opportunities and neighborhoods have probably developed over the course of the last 11 years. So I'm interested in kind of like opening a little bit of a line of discussion right now on where is the opportunity in 2017, and that maybe I'm looking for an answer in like price points. Maybe I'm looking for an answer in specific neighborhoods and maybe the Baltimore or maybe the Philadelphia area. Maybe there's a certain level of renovation where you're seeing the borrowers kind of win because it's more competitive, as you just said, and there's a lot more people in the space. But I found that in some of the markets that I'm in throughout the country, that means that maybe instead of doing like standard fix and flip property where we change out a kitchen, maybe do a gut, now there's more opportunity for the more experienced investor with capital and the construction resources to like pop the second story, do a ranch that turns into a second story because there's not as much competition in that space. Or in the Atlanta market, we have a lot of more experienced builders and buyers who will pay $500,000, $600,000, $450,000 for a ranch home and then pop the second story on that and spend, $350,000 and then sell that property for anywhere from $900,000 to $1.2 million. And there's not as much competition in that space. And they're really easy deals for that person to like step in, take advantage of. They're paying nearly retail price for the properties, but that's where the opportunity has migrated as that market's heated up. So can you speak to some of those hot areas in the markets and the deal flow that comes across your desk, Jason?
Sure. So I'm a very firm believer of investing in real estate in medium housing price neighborhoods. And the reason it is that's where the majority of the retail buyers are. That's where the majority of things just happen, at least in the markets that we lend in and that we buy in. I'd like to think it's like that everywhere, but I'm going to just say in the areas that we do business in, we really try to stay in the median housing price neighborhoods. This business, and a lot of people don't realize this sometimes, but it's still institutional and bank driven. And the reason that is when you finish a property, let's say you buy a house, when you renovate it, two things are either going to happen. Either going to sell it to a homeowner who chances are will rely on bank financing, or you're going to go refinance it, and you're going to refinance with a bank. So there's banks involved in both of that stuff. If you ever heard of obviously Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, they have their conforming loan limits. That's typically the best pricing for their conventional mortgage model, and that's all kind of based on median housing prices, not the lower stuff, not the higher stuff. Is there opportunities on lower stuff and higher stuff? Absolutely. And there's a huge niche for both of those things. That being said, the majority of the action happens in the median housing neighborhoods. So think about some subdivisions, some cities, some towns inside your general metropolitan area of what's there. For instance, we do a lot of stuff in the Washington, D.C. and Baltimore market, right? That's our core market. And then, we have an office in Philadelphia as well. The two counties locally that have the most action, and it's also because of the counties that have median housing price neighborhoods, are Prince George's County and Baltimore County. Those two. A really easy way to determine what those neighborhoods are or what those areas are is go to like auction.com and follow where the majority of the auction sales are, or where a lot of the foreclosure sales are. And you can follow trends that way. Most of the foreclosures in the state of Maryland are in those two counties. And you can kind of follow, and if there's a lot of foreclosures, chances are there's a lot of opportunities for investors to go buy stuff at a discount. And again, there's opportunities in all properties and in all counties and in all price points. I mean, we've bought and lent on $10,000, $20,000 properties or $20,000 loan amounts or purchase prices. I'm not saying they're worth $20,000 afterwards. Our average loan amount is still $150,000, $160,000. That's in D.C. suburbs. That's in Baltimore. That's in Philly as well. It's about $150,000, $160,000 loan amount, meaning that those values are about $275,000 or so. So The first is stay at medium price neighborhoods, at least in my opinion, and related to the areas, follow foreclosure trends on that. And also what I've seen is the experienced builders, developers, investors that really are experts in those particular neighborhoods are the ones that are making all the money because they can pay the same price as anyone. Like they don't have to buy super discounted properties. Like they'll pay retail, what I call investor retail. So they're paying the best price they can possibly pay, but their quality of renovations and their experience of how exactly you have to renovate the house, exactly the size of the bedrooms, closets, appliance package, paint, molding, everything is to a T because they've done so many deals there that they sell for higher than everybody else. They sell higher than I do, and we do a lot of deals, but I'm not the master expert flipper in some of these neighborhoods. They live in those neighborhoods. They know exactly what to do. If you're a newer investor, you cannot try to compete with an experienced investor that knows exactly what they're doing. It's not going to work. Their construction costs are less than you. Their reputation is better than you. They can pay the exact same price as you can pay on the house, and they will make significantly more. And chances are, the price they're paying, you can't even pay at that price because even if you bought it at that price, you probably wouldn't make money on that deal. They're making money because they have cheaper construction costs and they're selling a better product than you can put out. And I'm not saying that you eventually can't compete with that, but it's just really something to think about. If you take this to underwriting loans and we evaluate properties, I have so many newer borrowers that come to us and say, this property's worth $200,000. And I'll say, it is worth $200,000 if this developer right here fully executes their product on it. I'm not saying that you can't sell for this price, but you just haven't been through it yet. You don't know exactly the quality of renovations that this neighborhood entails for you to sell it at that price point. So I think that's a thing that a lot of newer investors kind of need to not necessarily worry too much about, but it needs to be on the top of their head. Make sure you kind of know your level of execution and how well you can perform on a deal before you kind of dig into it.
Yeah, that is a great point, especially for someone who hasn't experienced that yet, because you do see people put out fantastic product and they get it done at a fantastic price for the level of, design that goes into it. We see in the Chicago market, there's certain neighborhoods and these properties probably sell around $175,000 to $185,000. Their cash sale on the other side, they're buying them for $30,000, $35,000, $25,000, maybe $45,000. They're probably spending $60,000 to $70,000 to get them done. And, one of the things you have to do is put a full bathroom finished basement because we have a lot of buyers who basically have extended families who are living in the basement, and they pretty much put a kitchenette and treat them like illegal duplexes here in Chicago, and then have two families living in the household. This is just, you have to know that. But if you were an out-of-town person and you thought, I could just, put this all together and not quite, you really got to spend some money on those basements, and they got to look right in order to get, the 175, 185 high-end, high watermark comp. And I'll tell you what else, Jason. The other thing I learned over the past 12 months or so, maybe a little longer, because I've been flipping properties. I also wholesale properties, and I've been on the selling side of the equation for a long number of years as a real estate investor myself. And I'm learning that not all real estate agents are created equally. And, some of these developers that I know personally who have the quality of renovation piece mastered also have an agent that performs above average as well. So the pricing of the house initially is, just a little lower maybe than they want to sell it, and they're able to entice the bidding wars and get these properties sold in 7 to 10 days, especially in this kind of market. Whereas somebody who's newer, less experienced and shooting for the moon may overprice the property and sit there for 30, 40 days. Their listing goes stale. So it's along with a million other things I'm not capable of speaking to on how a good agent, gets a property sold at maybe a 4 or 5% above the average sale price for similar condition properties in that neighborhood. So that was just kind of the other piece I wanted to share was the actual sell and the person who's experienced on the agency side.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything over the last year, 2 years, a strategy, a single idea, some system that you've kind of put in place in your business, whether that's, on the investment side or whether that's the hard money banker side, where you guys experienced exponential growth or maybe just outstanding results from putting that into practice?
Yeah, so A big thing I think a lot of entrepreneurs and real estate investors fall into the trap of, entrepreneur ADD and trying to have their hands involved in everything instead of trying to be a master of one thing. I know so many, and everyone, 90% of the investors I know fall into this trap. Like, all of a sudden, they'll be flipping a few properties, and they'll kind of put it, not on autopilot, but like they make good money, and they're in a good spot. And they're like, cool, I want to start doing this now. I want to start doing this now. I want to start doing this now. And then they start doing that, and they don't realize that their core business, let's call it, starts suffering. So now I'm buying rentals. Now maybe I'm lending some money. Now I'm coaching. That's another kind of extension of a lot of people's businesses. And then they start working on that, and they devote a lot of time and energy to that. And then all of a sudden their core business that's making them all the money and it's a well-oiled machine starts running into trouble. And they don't realize that. Like, we've really, really, really been hyper-focused on what we do and how we do it. And we've got a lot of room for growth. And it's slow and steady. Like I said, this stuff doesn't happen overnight. But instead of trying to go out there and, let's do coaching, let's do this. I mean, believe me, we've had, the carrot dangled in front of us of other opportunities. And a lot of them we've tried to bite and try to move into some different spaces and some different opportunities. But we've really learned to be hyper-focused on exactly what we do and just keep growing it and growing it and growing it. As far as I'm concerned, if you can do something, once, you can do something 10 times and 100 times and 1,000 times and 1,000,000 times. You might as well just keep replicating it over and over and over. So instead of trying to do all these things, stick to what's currently working and just keep growing it. And that's what we've been doing with Hard Money Bankers.
Well said. I'm guilty of, now we're going to do the seminars. Now we're going to try out the coaching. Now we're going to try new construction, which I never did actually get one out of the ground. Now we're going to, obviously I'm holding rentals because we're real estate investors, and real estate investor has to hold rentals, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're all guilty. I'm guilty as well. We flipped a bunch of, in 2013, we went out and flipped a ton of houses. 2014, I was like, this is a house. And then we stopped flipping houses. I bought rentals. Then we were like, I don't want to hold rentals. I want to sell my rentals. So it's a learning experience. I mean, we're all guilty of it. It's just, and I think sometimes you have to go through that because obviously, you look at this, you look down the road and you look at this path, and then you're like, oh yeah, this path is going to be smooth. We're just going to go this way. And then all of a sudden, like, in reality, your path is swerving and there's speed bumps and there's a lot of things and it's not as easy as you think. So I feel like we all go down that path, and then, you teach yourself and you learn the lesson to, okay, let's bring this back to what I'm good at.
It's so ironic. I remember I felt like I had a missed opportunity. So, I got in 2006. By 2010, I was at a place where I was like looking back at all the, 100 or so deals I had done over the last 4 years, and many of them were assignments. And I'm sitting there, all but bankrupt at the time, and I'm like, oh man, if I would have just flipped all those houses instead of wholesaling them out, I'd be okay now today. But it was kind of like a fallacy. It was like a mind trick, because along the way I had to do a lot of work, Jason. I had to hustle, I had to grind, I had to make a lot of phone calls, and there really wouldn't have been the additional bandwidth. It would have been a completely different business model to go out and flip all of those houses. It was not just like it was this easy thing looking back. And I feel like, some of that entrepreneurial ADD that you speak of is, not looking back over it, but looking forward over it. Like, oh yeah, well, if I'm going to just, I'll just build new construction. I'll be like Toll Brothers and just be this fantastic quick thing when we're building hundreds of houses. We're going to just flip houses and we'll flip a ton of them. But, there's a lot of work involved no matter which one of those pathways, a lot of risk for the reward that you see. We minimize the risk up front and the time commitment. Great point. Absolutely great point. So, Jason, to you, who is the most successful real estate investor or developer, and why do you believe they are successful?
The person, or just like hypothetical?
However you want to answer the question's cool with me.
I don't know anyone individually that I believe is. Success is whatever you make it do. It can be financial. It can be, freedom, doing what you want to do when you want to do it. I mean, and hopefully this answers this question the way that I state it. So a buddy of mine who I'm in a mastermind group with, he's in our market. He does a lot of flips. And I'll never forget him saying, and I strongly believe this, he was like, we were talking about, everyone wanting to do more and more deals, and I've never been a big advocate of doing more and more deals. I'd rather just do better deals and be more profitable on them. And he was like, I don't remember what his bottom line number was, hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe $1 million that he tries to bring in every year. And he was like, all I want to do is one deal. I just want to do one deal I make the money I want and I'm completely out and I'll have to do the one deal a year. And it wasn't all that realistic that he could accomplish everything on one deal. He has to do dozens and dozens of deals a year, like typical everybody does. But the point of it is, success to me is I just need to make financially this amount of money, and this is as many hours as I want to work a week. When I accomplish that, I'm good. Every year I try to do a smaller amount of deals, and I try to make a bigger margin on each one of those deals. A bigger margin financially and less work on per transaction. So I don't know if the question was best or most successful, but kind of figuring out, in order to set up a goal, you need to work backwards, right? You need to figure out kind of what the end game is and then work backwards to that. But whatever the end game is, if it's this much money, this much time, this much, you got to mold your day, you got to mold your week, you got to mold your month, you got to mold your year, maybe even mold your life into whatever that goal is, and then that will turn into success of, cool, this is how much money I need to make in order to make this much money, this is what I need to do, this is how much time I need to spend, and, if you can kind of master that game, which takes some time to do, but eventually you master it, then to me, you're the best, most successful investor.
Yeah, I like that answer. I remember, when I was younger, 26, 27, it was kind of more about the money. It was a dollar amount. It was, oh man, if I could just make 20, 30 grand a month or whatever the number was back then. At the time in 2006, my daughter lived in Chicago. I lived in Philadelphia. That's where I started, was in Philadelphia. And I was in Philadelphia and she was in Chicago up until about end of 2014. So when I finally built a business around me in Philadelphia, I was blessed to have some fantastic partners just kind of come out of the world and come into my life. It seemed like really a gift from God at the time, and it was. And I remember I moved to Chicago in 2015 in January so that I could be near my daughter. And right around that same time, I knew I was going to make the move. And this was like the biggest thing, the scariest thing I was ever going to do, because to me it was like I'm going to move to Chicago and then everything in Philadelphia would go to shit. And instead, there were houses in Chicago and it was cold in Chicago, so I started doing Florida and I learned how to enter new real estate markets at the same time. Even looking back at that moment, when I finally moved out here and I could see like the look on my daughter's face, she was like, 13, I think at the time, when she came in and, saw the condo for the first time and, we like live on the water out here on Lake Michigan, and it was just like, I feel like that was it. Like I kind of like reached success at that point. This was like everything I ever wanted, was to live in Chicago and just be like near my daughter. And then for me, this, the idea of success, or why I wake up and hustle every day, changed from I got to get out there to Chicago. All of a sudden I looked around and I was like, I'm here now, to I have great business partners in every one of these markets that I work in. And for me, it's like to continue building the opportunity and growing the opportunity and single-mindedly doing what we're doing, keeping the focus on growing this, so that like every one of my partners can now reach what, their new levels of success in life are kind of like defined as. So it's definitely transformed for myself. And I know that the answer to that question, I guess, all of a sudden becomes more like how am I defining success, if I was just to answer it right there, rather than, oh, it's Donald Trump. We get at a point in time that would have been my answer for a long time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's everybody individually what they want out of it. I mean, I know a lot of people that flip a few houses. They work their full-time job and they like their full-time job, and they work that full-time job because they like it. They might not make. Obviously most people wish they made more money, but they enjoy it. They're challenged. They like it. Then they flip a few properties to supplement that income, and they have a good gig. They get take
nice.
There's not many people out there when you say, well, what are you gonna, what's your end goal? I've done a lot of these interviews as well with, successful people. And I ask the same question all the time to people. I say, what's your end goal? Are you this like, when I'm out, like throw my cell phone away, go to a beach and just sit there and don't do anything for the rest of my life? Or is I'm going to continue to work? And a lot of people, not a lot, every single one of them are like, I hate going to the beach and just sitting there doing nothing. Like I want to keep myself challenged. So again, like you're saying, success is determined on, what the individual person wants out of it.
Absolutely. So, Jason, are there 2 or 3 books that you have recommended to people most often?
Yes, there are. So there's a book, probably read about a year ago. It's the life story of Warren Buffett. It's called The Snowball. It's one of my favorite books. The problem with it,
nice.
It's either like a 40-hour audiobook or I don't even know. I did it on Audible. It was 40 hours to listen to, and it took, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 months, but it was well worth it. That's always a huge recommendation. Just think about the term snowball. It's one of the kind of terms that my business partner and I talk about every day, and it's probably one of the most important things to us. So think about the term snowball. You start a snowball, think about like the knowledge you have in your real estate industry, or think about, the money you have in your savings account, and, grab some snow, pack it together. You have a snowball, right? You can throw it. It's small. You can touch it, but it's not all that sexy besides just a little snowball. Now, bring that snowball to the top of a hill and push it down, and it grows and it grows and it grows. You learn more. Your assets are growing. Your wisdom's growing. Everything's growing. And all of a sudden it gets to the point that it's halfway down the mountain, and it's growing so big it's out of control. Whatever's in its way will continue to push over, and you can't stop it from growing. It's so big. So think about different things inside your business or your life that you could compare to a snowball, and we think about it all the time. We think about that compared to how big our email list is, or how big some of our marketing funnels are, and things like that over time they grow and grow and grow and grow. And you don't have to, and after they're like up and running, you don't have to do much heavy lifting on them. You just kind of keep it consistent. So after 40 hours of listening, that was the big thing I got out of that book. Some other books that I really like The Richest Man of Babylon, and stuff that compares, real life to personal finance. One big, I don't know if I got this quote out of The Richest Man of Babylon, but it's one that I always, whenever I reread that, because that's a short read, I think that's only like a 2-hour audiobook or something, a short read, a few hour audiobook that I always think about is paying yourself first. So we always think about it, think about this with personal finance. Let's say you get a paycheck, and it doesn't matter if you get a paycheck from a full-time government job or a bartending job, doesn't matter where you work, or if you get an income from flipping a house. So what happens when we get money? So we get our money, we pay our bills, we buy something that we want, we spend it, and then it's like, oh, cool, I got a few extra $100 left over. I'm going to put it into an asset. I'm going to put it in my savings account. I'm going to save it. I'm going to do whatever with it, invest it. The mindset is like complete opposite. It should be complete different. It's first off, figure out how much money you want to save or invest first. When you get paid, that money needs to go there first. In essence, you're paying yourself first, and the rest of the money can get paid, your house payment, your car payment, or whatever the case is. Like, why should your car payment get paid before you get paid? So it's kind of a mixed up theory that I think a lot of people have backwards that I've, pretty passionate about. And obviously, we're not talking about, being better at debt and, finance. But I'm just saying in general, just kind of, part of that book gave me a good mindset of you pay yourself first, you pay others second.
Absolutely. Well said. So, Jason, if you could go back and share with your, 18 or 20-year-old self, the crown jewel of wisdom, what would that be?
Stick to your wheelhouse. Stick to, whatever your wheelhouse is, stick to it. If, after you kind of get over the education hurdle of learning what part of this business you want to be in, after you're in it, just stick to it and ramp it up as big as possible, or as big as you can get it to. There's no need to steer into seeing shiny objects and steering in that direction. Just stick to what you know and stick to what you like. So either you're successful and you don't like it, or you're not successful but you like it. Whichever one that, you got to mold those together. You got to like what you're doing, and then turn it into, mold it to becoming successful in that. We all know that wholesaling works. We all know that flipping works. We all know that rentals work. We all know that lending works. We all know that investing in commercial properties works. We all know that all of that stuff works. It's proven no matter what market we're in, it works. So anybody can be successful in any of that. Pick which one works for you the best and exploit it.
Jason, I know you put out a lot of great content and information. What can people do, listeners, if they want to get in touch with you or check you out?
Yeah, absolutely. So hardmoneybankers.com, that's typically the best thing. Private real estate lending. Typically we just focus in Maryland, Virginia, D.C., Pennsylvania, New Jersey, those 5 key states. But we do a lot of stuff nationwide. My partner and I wrote a book called The Whiteboard. It's on Amazon. We're very passionate about not just real estate, but also just business, entrepreneurship, personal finance, marketing, and stuff like that. So, even if we aren't in an area that you need a loan in, we like having followings, we like having collaborators, and all of us kind of collectively can grow together. So it's a powerful thing. So hardmoneybankers.com. is the best URL for us.
Got it. Is there somewhere people can sign up for an email list there or something like that, Jason?
Yeah, there's 16 opt-ins on that website. between free videos and newsletters and free reports and free deal analyzers, we have nothing to sell either. It's always, to us, there's value in just, having loyal audiences and big audiences because, eventually, hopefully we can do a loan together. So, at one point, or maybe somebody we can do a loan for. So, yeah, just email addresses. Won't ask you to ever buy anything.
Yeah, and I'm the same way. I appreciate that philosophy there, Jason. Ian's the same way. Ian also had an episode with us here on the REI Diamond Show. I'll make sure I include his episode if anyone wants to check out the Philly version. And also we talked about valuing property as well from the hard money banker's perspective. Yeah, not selling a bunch of stuff. Our REI Diamonds Show listeners, I've done a countless number of deals, whether I bought the deals directly, whether somebody in the audience bought a deal for me. So really that's the reason why we put the show on. It's cool to see people come on the show who are like-minded, so I really appreciate that. Cool,
yeah,
Jason.
Absolutely.
We're at the finish line here. I really appreciate you coming on the show. I enjoyed talking about some of the areas where we would focus, some of the things, how we could get started, and just avoiding the entrepreneurial ADD. So I got a lot of value out of it myself. I'm sure the listeners did too. So thank you for taking time out of your day to come on the show.
Thank you, Dan. I certainly appreciate it.
And thank you for listening to this episode of the REI Diamond Show. Are you interested in receiving a notification when I release the next episode? You can either sign up for email at www.reidiamonds.com or subscribe through one of the podcasting apps, including iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. If you are interested in selling a deal to me, visit www.reidiamonds.com and click the link at the top of the page. I am currently looking for deals in Philadelphia tri-state area, the Baltimore, Maryland, D.C. market, the Chicagoland region and the Collier counties, the Atlanta region, and the Tampa Bay area in Florida. Finally, do you know anyone else who might enjoy this episode? I'd appreciate the referrals, and I'm sure they'd love the information. Last but not least, I appreciate you, too, my loyal REI Diamond Show listener. Dan Breslin here. Catch you later.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the REI Diamonds Show with Dan Breslin. To receive email notifications of new weekly episodes, sign up at www.reidiamonds.com.